Hi everyone, my name is Mark Deary and I'm a filmmaker. And today I want to talk about how there's no such thing as an overnight success. Now, why are we talking about this? It's funny because over the years I've seen a lot of people who kind of emerge and they're like, whoa, this person, they just appeared overnight, they're everywhere. And I really started thinking about this specifically the other night when I watched a film called Jack London's Martin Eden. It's from 2021 and it's just kind of an indie film, I think. It's funny because my mum recommended it to me. She watches a lot of period films and stuff, and she knew that I was doing this challenge where this year is part of my bucket list. I've wanted to do it since I was a little kid. I've watched a film every day. I haven't missed a day. I've watched a feature film every day. So she texted me and said, oh, if you haven't heard of this one, you should give it a watch. It's about being a writer. And considering Candice just published her first novel, my wife Candice just published a novel, well, that's a big mouth, she thought that it'd be relevant to us because it's about Jack London being a writer, or Martin Eden being a writer, but apparently it's Jack London's most autobiographical novel, so it's kind of like his life. And there's a couple of things that really stood out to me. Like, I really enjoyed watching it because, the first one was, obviously he becomes hugely successful. So he starts out being really poor and he does so much work and he like falls in love with writing, falls in love with reading, falls in love with writing, but he also notices that he's from a very poor background and there are rich people doing what they're doing, and he kind of learns like, oh, you don't have a job, and they're like, oh, you have a job? He's like, what? So he's hard working, comes from a very working class background, but decides that he is passionate about poetry and writing, and he becomes a writer, and he works very, very, very hard to become a writer. And eventually he ends up having massive success, but not before going through a lot of turmoil, and he tries to, falls in love with and tries to marry a beautiful, rich girl who kind of looks at him more like a pupil than a lover, I guess. But he talks to her parents and they're like, oh no, you've got to, or maybe the parents say she can't be with him. So he has to, even his wife, the person who would become his wife, they don't actually get married. The person who would become his wife is like, why don't you go get a job? Your writing's not succeeding, because he's doing all this writing, But then he has success and all of a sudden everybody cares about him. He's rich now because he's had a massive lot of success. And his family, or the family I should say, sorry, who, like the woman who he was going to marry, who he didn't, her family, are all of a sudden like, oh, look, you're successful and you're rich and this is great. And everybody's like, oh, this guy, look, he's great. But what happens is he'd done all this writing and he'd struggled for a long time. So he'd written like short stories for publications and gotten them published and gotten paid like, a couple of dollars here and there for them. But all of a sudden, because he became famous, and it all happened because of something political. Anyway, you can watch the film or read the book if you want to learn about it specifically. But what I want to talk about is basically, he got famous by chance because a newspaper reporter kind of threw him under the bus calling him a socialist when he wasn't a socialist. But off the back of that, all of a sudden he started selling novels because it's like he had attention in the public, and he had a novel, so he was in the right place at the right time with a novel ready to go, and all of a sudden people who were socialists wanted to read his novel, and then he became rich. And then all of his old writing, all of a sudden everybody wanted to publish all of his old writing. And so he got rich for all of his old writing. All of a sudden everybody was like, oh, you're great, you're a great writer, blah, blah, blah. Even though he was getting all this money for things he'd done when he was broke and nobody wanted to know about him. And he was like, the writing is the same as it was when I was broke, even though now I'm rich and you care about it, And so at one point I think it's in a dream in the film, but at one point in the film, somebody's saying like, oh, you're wonderful. Oh yeah, look, now you're rich, it's great. And he's like, look, you didn't want to know me when I had no money and when I'd written all this stuff, which people want now. So I consider all the money I have now is payment for services rendered. Services rendered. As in, he'd already done the writing and he's being paid for what he already did, even though nobody acknowledged it up until he was popular and everybody wanted his work. And this is a real thing. So if this is the first video of mine you've seen, this is video 34 in a series I'm doing of 100 videos in 100 days up until the 31st of December 2025, while I edit a documentary, because 20 years ago I made my first feature film, independent, no-budget feature film, and it was terrible. I don't ever expect it to do what this Martin Eden, his novel did. It was an excellent novel, but with film you kind of have to learn. Like his early writing, nobody would have seen his early writing. It was when he was doing good writing. Anyway, so I'm making this documentary, but it's funny how you reflect on how, if you were to make something amazing, say tomorrow I started on a new feature film and it was amazing, and at one Sundance something people, oh, this new filmmaker's emerged, even though you're not new, because for 20 years you've been doing work, And so that's what he was saying. As a writer, like, he was being paid for services rendered. And there's this thing which I kind of searched up the story because I hadn't heard of it until I saw the film. And it's actually, in psychology, there's a term called Martin Eden syndrome. And Martin Eden syndrome is basically, I think it includes wealth, but basically, like, for the purposes of this video today, Martin Eden syndrome is when you strive for something, you work extremely hard for it, and then you achieve it. But and you think, when I get this thing, I will have satisfaction. I will have, everything will be great then once I have this thing. And once you achieve it, you still have emptiness. It doesn't plug the hole that you have in your life. And that's called Martin Eden syndrome, based off the novel, because obviously Martin Eden, he struggled as a writer, and he thought, once I'm rich, once I'm in this society, then they'll accept me. And they sort of accepted him, but they didn't really. And so he was still miserably unhappy. He was still super unhappy. And at the end of the film, he doesn't actually commit suicide, but he kind of, contemplates suicide. They imply that he's contemplating it. And I think in real life, I don't know if it was Martin Eden or Jack London, but I think he contemplated suicide but didn't do it, but then died of some horrible disease or something. I can't remember exactly. But the syndrome is basically to say, if you get something that you've worked really hard for, but the reason you're trying to get it is to plug some hole, which was him being poor when he was young, falling in love with a rich girl. She couldn't be with him because he was poor, became rich, but then the hole wasn't plugged and they never got together because she couldn't understand that he was always the same person. When he had the money and when he didn't have the money, he was the same person. An interesting thing about this is the next movie I watched in my, watching a movie every day for the year, it was My Fair Lady, which I've never seen, with Audrey Hepburn and what's his face, Rex Harrison. And I'd never seen it, and it was fantastic. Absolutely loved it. Really long film, but it was just a great film. But it was another example. I guess it's sort of spoilers, sorry if you haven't seen My Fair Lady, but it's been out since the 50s or 60s, whenever it came out, so there's been plenty of time for you to see it. But anyway, in the end, and this won't really spoil it because you'd need to see the film to really get it. But at the end, Rex Harrison's been training her to go from being a poor, into being, rich and debonair, And once he does it, he kind of celebrates himself and the guy who did the bet with him, like, look what we did, we turned this guy around, but he never acknowledges all the work she's done to be turned around. So she's kind of now, she's common, but she's perceived as, a princess, basically. They think she would have to be royalty. And because they've fooled everyone into thinking she's royalty when she was just common. At the end, the guy's talking to her and she's falling in love with someone else and he's a bit jealous. And he says, the guy who trained her, who was like a phonetics specialist or whatever, he says, she says to him, like, the other guy, the guy who did the bet, he always saw me as like a flower girl who sold flowers, whereas you always saw me as common and trash. And you still see me as common and trash. Even though I've done this, you still see me as, lowly, not the same as you, not just a person. You don't see me, the person me. You see what you turned me into and what I was before. Whereas this guy always saw me as just a lovely person who sold flowers. He didn't care. And so she said, you'll never see me this way. And then in the end, they kind of have a great relationship because they're kind of friends. They need each other. And it was interesting because it was like, I look at me and my wife Candice a bit like this. Like, each of us independently were fine on our own, but we each brought each other closer to, I don't know, normality. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but like, yeah, I feel like in this movie, in My Fair Lady, like, she's a bit crazy on one side. I mean, crazy is probably not a good word. I shouldn't associate that with, but like, she's, abrasive and vulgar and common, quote unquote common. You know what I'm talking about, the stereotype, the cliche of common. Whereas he's like the cliche of debonair. And so they bring each other into having more of a mutual respect for each other. And so in the end, like, that, you don't know if they get together. It kind of ends on a not a cliffhanger, but like on a question. But they're together because they're friends and they kind of need each other because they help each other be better people, I think. Maybe I'm totally misinterpreting the story. But it was interesting to me because similarly to Martin Eden and similarly to this idea I'm talking about today, she became this overnight sensation because everyone's like, who is this beautiful? She'd have to be royalty. She must be a princess from somewhere. How has she not been in the rich people's scene all this time? Like, how have we never heard of her? She's so beautiful and she carries herself so amazingly and, everything about her so overnight. And yet she worked for 6 months or whatever on the bet to get to that stage. And people don't acknowledge that. But the fact is, she was beautiful when she was a commoner, and she's the exact same person once she's done all these tricks and this, like, just showy, garbage. It's like, people say you can put a ribbon on a turd, but it's still a turd. But it's like, but if it's a beautiful person, then you put a ribbon on it and they can become a princess, And I think that's the thing. I think he, for services rendered, he was writing amazing work, but nobody cared. Then when they did care, they didn't realise that what he was doing when he was poor, that a poor person could do this. He was just like, come in the club. I always used to say this about the games industry when I was young. When I was young, I just first started in games and then moved into film. I always said the games industry was so insular. It was like everybody wanted to do it. It's probably the same these days. I'm not sure because I'm not really part of the games industry anymore, but it was like to get into the games industry was so difficult. There was so many people with skills, so many people lined up to get in. And when they'd let someone in, it wasn't like, hey, everybody come in, let's do this. It was like, open up the door, come in, yep, close the door, and now you're in this exclusive group of people who are part of game development, you know? And I feel like, yeah, it's kind of like the same with her going from common to rich, like, oh, yep, now you're in this group. And with him, like, oh, yep, now you're in this group. Now you can talk to all the rich people because the rich people could afford to become writers because they weren't having to be working class, whereas he did both and worked his ass off. So it's an interesting concept to me, but I've seen this in 20 years of doing filmmaking. A lot of people become overnight success stories. And I guess their success may seem to come overnight, but generally it's like the what's under the surface of the ocean with the iceberg. Like you see this tiny little bit of progress they've made in public and not this massive amount that they made, you know, when no one was watching. And also, I think it's an interesting thing to say that if you are doing creative things to plug some hole and you think, oh, when I get successful, all my problems will disappear. I think that's a mistake as well. And I can say this as a failed filmmaker for 20 years that if I'd been, maybe I would have been more ambitious. If I'd been trying to plug a hole, I was always happy. I just wanted to tell stories that meant something to me, you know? And I feel like I've achieved that in my life, so I'm content, you know? But yeah, I think if you're trying to plug a hole, and you'll often see this with celebrities when they kind of have a fall from grace, it's like they got there and then there was this emptiness. And I think it's the same for us. Like Candice has just finished her first novel, or finished publishing her first novel. It's actually her third novel. She just hasn't published the first two. But she just finished the novel. It's published. It's available to buy right now. It's called Portable, and it's on Amazon. Her name's Candice Deere, like my name's Mark Deere. So you can go buy a copy on Amazon. I'll get her to talk about it in a video with me. But I think she's, this last week or so, because it was published on the 30th of October, so today's the 4th of November, so it's been 4 days. And I think the last couple of days she's been a bit off because it's like, it's done now, and it's like you have this void. And this happens with every project. You do a project and it fills your life, you know, and then you finish it and you're like, oh, now I have this space and I don't know what to do. And usually, in my case, I'll just fill it with another project, which is probably a mistake. We need to, you know, just take the time to be calm and present with ourselves, you know. But this void does exist, it's real. You finish a project and you have a void because the project is done. So I think that's a similar kind of feeling, I guess. Like that void that you feel when you finish a project is the same void you would feel if you had monetary success, riches, whatever it is that you're aspiring when you achieve that goal. Whatever your problems were here, the problems are still existing up there. So anyway, that's my experience as a 43-year-old who's been doing this for 20 years. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about it. I really enjoyed the movie. It was on Tubi, so like you could watch it for free probably. Jack London's Martin Eden, I think it was 2021. You know, it was okay. I actually really enjoyed it. I think the lessons and the message of it was so clear. So yeah, I do endorse it. I wouldn't call it a masterpiece or anything, but it was a timely film for me. Like I really enjoyed it. So maybe you will too if you enjoyed this video. If you haven't watched any of my other videos, like I said, this is video 33, I think, or 34. This might be video 34. 34 out of 100 that I'm making in 100 days. So I'm going to finish on the 31st of December. So there's plenty more videos to come. And simultaneously, I'm looking at all my old footage over the last 20 years to kind of try and put it together into some sort of documentary to take these ideas and put them into a movie so I can convey an idea about what it means to be a creative for 20 years and not reach that level of success where you might have Martin Eden syndrome, you know, and how it still feels like success. But that's going to come out in the documentary as I do it. But I'm sure this idea will make it into the actual documentary. So I'm really excited about that. I'm working on that. This is just me sharing my process in life because I'm on long service leave from work. So if you enjoyed it, subscribe, watch the next 64 videos as well. You can go back and watch the 33 that I already made before this one. And yeah, I can't wait to see what comes of it all. And I honestly, it sounds crazy. I'm feeling a little bit lost because I don't know what's going to come next. I've been a teacher for 10 years and technically I'm just on long service leave. So in February, I'm going back to work. But I'm having a weird time. I think because I've had so much space, talking about having space and being with yourself in the space, I've had a lot of time to think, and I'm still thinking, you know, and I'm figuring out what's next for me. And I mean, not to say I'll stop working, because I'll still be working, but just, I don't know, creatively what's next, life-wise what's next. We're in a town, I moved to this town, I had to do 3 years as part of a transfer. I came from Brisbane, the capital city, I moved to this town. And I've done my 3 years now, so I have the option to go back. So I might be moving cities. There's a lot of options, and yeah, it's interesting how I'm kind of thinking out loud on camera in these videos, and I think they're cathartic for me as much as hopefully they're helping anyone who's watching. And if nothing else, you're getting to see me a lot closer than anybody ever has before, more publicly than my circle of friends and family. So it's been interesting for me, and I don't know what I think of it so far, but I'm keeping on going because it's the project I decided I was going to do. So, and until it stops being fun, because I'm having a great time making these videos, I'll keep making them, and we'll see if I get to 100 by December 31st. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video. And yeah, I hope you're being creative in your own life. Leave a comment if you are. I'd love to hear your stories and what you think of the videos so far. What you think of the Martin Eden syndrome, or about imposter syndrome, or imposter syndrome is another video, sorry, or about being an overnight success. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.